Welcome to the Dark Archive. I'm Mr. Nobody, and today we're going to talk about the dark trajectory of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, a predator who terrorized families in Massachusetts and Montana for decades. Get ready for a 20-minute journey through a world of dark secrets, miscarriages of justice, and the pain of those who never found answers. Divided into 10 chapters, this video will show you how a manipulative and sick man deceived everyone, and what we can learn from this chilling case. Chapter 1: Childhood and Origins. Nathaniel was born in 1957 in Worcester, Massachusetts, and from a very young age he already displayed behaviors that drew attention. Diagnosed with neurological problems, social isolation, and a home where family tensions were constant. At school, reports spoke of a lonely boy with strange attitudes and a fascination for control. This scenario, combined with his family's lack of preparation to deal with his crises, created fertile ground for him to develop increasingly dangerous fantasies. But none of this justified what he would become. Chapter 2: The First Attack. At the age of 17, Nathaniel began to show concrete signs of his monstrous side. Using a false police identity, he kidnapped a boy and took him to the woods, where he subjected him to cruel abuse. This tactic of using a uniform to gain trust and intimidate the victim would become his trademark. But despite the seriousness of the crime, the authorities at the time were unable to connect the gravity of the act to the real risk he posed. Chapter 3: Arrests and Releases. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Nathaniel accumulated a criminal record that included assaults and abuse, but the sentences he was given were short or only conditional. Every time he was released from prison, he would commit the same crimes again. Authorities failed to monitor or share information about his dangerousness, creating loopholes that he exploited masterfully. A predator on the loose, protected by the slow pace of a system that insisted on believing he could change. Chapter 4: New Life in Montana. In 1991, Nathaniel moved to Great Falls, Montana. New town, new faces, but the same hunger for violence. Disguised as a police officer or delivery man, he prowled poor neighborhoods and schools, always on the lookout for potential victims. He studied routines, chose his targets carefully, using his experience and manipulation to avoid arousing suspicion. The small, quiet community was not prepared for such an experienced and sneaky predator. To move back to Great Falls, Montana, where his mother lived, Nathaniel was on the loose once again. Perhaps what was more astonishing was the fact that he was asked to move to Montana by Massachusetts officials. As if it was a solution, however, for the next few years Nathaniel seemed to slip under the radar until after Zach's disappearance. This case was assigned to Detective Bill Bellucci. He was given a list of sex offenders in the region which did not include Nathaniel. However, Detective Bellucci decided to ignore this list and keep his focus on Nathaniel as he was seen in the alleyway by several witnesses. Detective Bellucci requested multiple search warrants for the property where Nathaniel and his mother lived together, but they were all denied. Nathaniel, meanwhile, moved out of his mother's home for the next 3 years. It became a cat and mouse game between him and Detective Bellucci. Despite Nathaniel's long criminal history, he managed to exploit loopholes within the legal system, evading abrupt consequences. However, Bellucci operated outside the conventional system, recognizing individual elements and identifying Nathaniel as an exceptional case. Although Nathaniel lacked a record of actual murder, he had come dangerously close to it on multiple occasions. On December 13, 1999, Bellucci, who had kept a keen eye on Nathaniel, spotted him outside an elementary school for the third time in a week. For the last 3 years, Bellucci had believed that Nathaniel would strike again, and Bellucci was justified in his concern during these visits to the local elementary school. Nathaniel wore a dark blue jacket in a knit cap and carried 2 cans of pepper spray, a toy gun, and a badge. Bellucci acted decisively, seizing the opportunity to charge Nathaniel with impersonating an officer and carrying a concealed weapon. On December 15, 1999, a judge approved a search warrant for objects used to impersonate officers at both Nathaniel's mother's home and his own. This was not a search warrant for violent crimes, but it was all Bellucci needed while searching Nathaniel's home. Police found items both expected and unexpected. There were items that aided Nathaniel in impersonating a law officer. There were a couple of coats, one dark blue and another with a toy badge in the pocket, a second toy badge, a stun gun, and a baseball cap reading security in 4 meant. However, the search took a dark turn when investigators discovered a pull string emerging from the ceiling of Nathaniel's kitchen. 2 albums were found with cutouts of children, as well as a document about knots and bondage, and an article entitled Autoerotic Asphyxia. With a little more scrutiny into Nathaniel's whereabouts, detectives discovered that he'd not gone to work on February 6, 1996, the day of Zach's disappearance, nor the days leading up to it. On that day, his mother had accompanied his brother to another town to attend a funeral. However, her car, an off-white 4-door 1978 Toyota Corolla, remained with Nathaniel. Given the discoveries made, Bellucci was granted another search warrant within 2 days of the first one. During the second search in the house, amongst newspaper clippings from Zach's case, police found a strange list entitled Lake Webster, with the names of 54 boys. They went all the way back to Nathaniel's first victims from Massachusetts, including the names of the 3 boys he assaulted in the 70s. The last entry was Zachary Ramsey, and it was followed by the word died. And it didn't stop there. 3,500 photographs of children and undeveloped film containing images of Nathaniel and 3 unidentified boys were also recovered. There were some journals with arbitrary characters that looked like some sort of coded writing. These were immediately taken in to be reviewed at a later date. Nathaniel's roommates were interviewed. One former roommate described having seen clothes that matched Zach's clothing that he was last seen in. He'd also found some bloodied gloves. In a conversation with another roommate, Nathaniel mentioned Zachary Ramsey without much context. At one point, he even claimed that Zach would never be found because he'd been dismembered and scattered across different locations. A month later, the code in the journal found at Nathaniel's home was cracked. It was a cookbook, but the recipes' names indicated Nathaniel's worst fantasies had already taken shape. The titles of the dishes had a disturbing pattern with names like Little Pot Pie, French Fried, and Little D. Finally, police found a large stained section of plywood in Nathaniel's garage, which was scrubbed with bleach and also struck several times with a meat cleaver as if it had been used as a cutting board. A luminol test in the room revealed that the word TAA had once been written on the floor in blood. This was tentatively linked to James TAA, a boy who was found reed and strangled in RDG, New Hampshire in 1973. It was learned that in the days after Zach's disappearance, Nathaniel had cookouts for his neighbors in which he served deer burgers that tasted strange. Nathaniel claimed that he hunted, killed, butchered, and wrapped the meat personally. However, Nathaniel didn't own a gun or a hunting license, and credit card record suggested that he stopped buying food for a month after Zach disappeared. Finally, what looked to be human hair was found inside as meat grinder. An excavation at a former residence uncovered 21 bone fragments belonging to a boy between 8 and 13 years old. The house's pipes couldn't be examined because they'd been replaced due to constant ling issues. DNA from the hair and bones belonged to 2 different African-American males, neither of whom was Zach. These bones have never been identified. Almost all of his life, Nathaniel had hunted like a leisurely activity, but when it came to legal proceedings and trial, it came down to just 3 children. Zach's case had caused the most uproar, and it could have been the catalyst that brought Nathaniel down. However, Zach's mother refused to believe that her son was dead. Was it denial stemming from the inconceivable pain associated with the emerging truth, or perhaps encouragement from the defense team? The world would never come to know that her refusal, however, hindered any closure to Zach's case. She didn't believe Nathaniel was in any way related to Zach's disappearance because a psychic convinced her that Zach was living in Italy. In fact, she threatened to defend Nathaniel if he was brought to trial for her son's murder. Eventually, the charges related to Zach's disappearance had to be dropped due to a lack of evidence. Police and prosecutors, who had worked hard in recent years to nab Nathaniel, had only one option: to focus on other possible victims, and to do it quickly. 2 names in the list found at Nathaniel's home belonged to the boys who lived in the same apartment building as him. These boys also appeared on film that had been seized from Nathaniel's home. One of the boys confirmed that Nathaniel invited them to a sleepover and then molested them, but the other boy visited Nathaniel in jail and wrote to him saying that he was his friend and that he never harmed him. This predator and sexual deviant was almost in the folds of the judicial system, and everyone would be able to see him for exactly who he was. But once again, the case was falling through the cracks of legality. 6-year-old Mary Patron, who was just a girl when she was assaulted by Nathaniel, recognized him in a blink. However, the statute of limitations had expired and Nathaniel couldn't be charged with this offense despite numerous failures by the judicial system in the past. Nathaniel was subsequently sentenced to 130 years in prison, without the possibility of parole on the charges of kidnapping, aggravated assault and sexual assault of various. In 2008, Nathaniel was found unconscious in his prison cell due to a heart attack. He'd been in poor health for some time, and on this day he was pronounced dead. He took many horrifying secrets to the grave. Nathaniel's case can be attributed to a number of factors, including inadequate communication and information sharing. For instance, this probation officer didn't know of his other crime in 1977. In 1999, one would expect the process might have changed. However, an court was not aware of Nathaniel's crimes in Massachusetts. The system failed to understand Nathaniel's pattern of behavior and thus failed to handle the situation. Lack of awareness directly led to the atrocious abuse of many children over the span of decades. Despite the objections of Zach's mother, a judge declared Zachary Ramsey legally dead in 2011. However, if Zach's mother was right, and he's still alive somewhere, he would be in his 30s and look like this. Nathaniel was a predator and possibly even yet he was allowed to walk free. Again and again, the fact that he served 11 years in a mental institution and assaulted again within a month of release was overlooked. Do you think that contemporary systems are equipped to effectively address such situations, or are there still individuals slipping through systemic loopholes, allowing them to perpetuate horrors that should have been prevented? Let us know in the comment section below. And if you found today's video interesting, I am Mr. Nobody, and that's it. Until next time, we'll bring you more dark stories and mysteries that defy the imagination. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of Dark Archive's future investigations. Good night, and beware of what lurks in the shadows.